HR leaned back and smiled when they said they would prove my guilt. I smiled too. Then I asked for every document with my name on it. The room went strangely quiet, and one person suddenly stopped taking notes. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fresh printer toner. It was one of those smells that seemed permanently trapped inside corporate buildings, woven into the carpet fibers and absorbed by the pale gray walls. Outside the glass windows, rain tapped softly against the city skyline, turning distant office towers into blurred shadows. Inside, nobody was smiling, at least not naturally. The smiles around the table looked rehearsed, polished, carefully arranged, like props. I sat alone on one side of the long table. Across from me sat three people from HR, a department manager, and someone from legal, whom I had never seen before. That last detail caught my attention immediately. People from legal never attended routine meetings, not unless someone wanted something documented, or someone wanted someone gone. The woman from HR folded her hands together and looked at me with the kind of sympathy that feels colder than open hostility. "Thank you for joining us today." I almost laughed, as if I had received a choice, as if the meeting invitation titled Mandatory Discussion had offered multiple options. The legal representative opened a thin black folder. A single sheet of paper slid across the polished table. The sound seemed unnaturally loud, like a blade leaving a sheath. Then came the sentence, the one that would replay in my head for weeks afterward. "We believe we have sufficient evidence to prove misconduct." The room became very quiet. Not silent. Quiet. There's a difference. Silence is empty. This room was crowded with tension. I glanced around the table. Nobody met my eyes. Not the manager who had praised my performance 3 months earlier. Not the HR specialist who had spent years greeting me cheerfully in hallways. Not even the nervous assistant taking notes, especially not her, because she looked terrified. And that was strange. I was the one being accused. Why did she look frightened? The question lingered in the back of my mind, a tiny crack appearing in an otherwise perfect wall. The HR director continued speaking. Words flowed smoothly. Policy violations, concerns, internal findings, procedures. Every sentence sounded polished enough to have been practiced beforehand, like actors reciting a script. But the more they talked, the more something felt wrong. Not legally wrong, humanly wrong. Their confidence seemed forced, almost brittle, as if they were trying very hard not to look nervous. The legal representative finally leaned forward. "We're prepared to proceed based on the documentation available." There it was. Documentation, evidence, records, the magic words. Most people panic when they hear them. Most people start defending themselves immediately, arguing, explaining, apologizing. I did none of those things. Instead, I asked a single question. Could I receive copies of all documents related to these allegations? The reaction was immediate, tiny, almost invisible, but it was there. The assistant stopped typing. The department manager blinked. The HR director's smile froze for half a second. Half a second is a very long time when someone expects a different answer. Rain continued tapping against the glass. Nobody spoke. Then the legal representative cleared his throat. "We'll determine what materials can be disclosed." Interesting. Not, of course. Not certainly. Not even will provide them. Just will determine. Something shifted inside me. A feeling. A faint instinct. Like noticing a loose floorboard in an otherwise beautiful house. You don't know what's underneath yet, but you know something is there. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, mostly formalities. Mostly people reading carefully prepared statements. I listened, I nodded, I took notes, and every minute made me more certain of one thing. The accusations themselves weren't the center of the story. Something else was. Something hiding behind them. Every now and then I caught people exchanging glances, quick looks, tiny signals, the kind coworkers develop after spending years together. Except these signals didn't look reassuring. They looked worried. The meeting finally ended. Chairs moved, folders closed, people stood. The official performance of confidence began to dissolve. That was when something happened. Something small. So small most people would have missed it. As I gathered my notebook, the assistant accidentally dropped a page. She bent down quickly, too quickly. Before picking it up, her eyes met mine. Just for a second. 1 second. Long enough to communicate something words couldn't. Fear. Not for herself, for me. Then she looked away immediately. Then she looked away. The page disappeared back into her folder. Nobody acknowledged it, nobody said anything. But the image stayed with me all afternoon. That look, that warning, that silent message. By evening, I had submitted a formal written request for every document, email, report, note, communication, and record connected to the allegations. I was meticulous, specific, polite, professional. And as I pressed send, an unexpected feeling settled over me. Not fear, not anger, anticipation. Because somewhere inside that building, people were reading my request. And I had the strange feeling that at least one of them had just realized a very serious mistake had been made. The next morning, before sunrise, my phone vibrated with an email notification. The sender's name made my stomach tighten, and the timestamp made even less sense. The email had been sent at 4:17 a.m., not 8 o'clock, not during normal business hours, not even late enough to be explained by overtime. 4:17, the kind of time stamped on messages written by people who either couldn't sleep or suddenly had a reason not to. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen. Outside, dawn was only beginning to pull color into the sky. The city still belonged to delivery trucks, street sweepers, and exhausted night shift workers, heading home through the cold blue light. The sender was from HR, not the director, not the legal representative. The assistant, the same assistant whose hands had trembled during the meeting. The same assistant who had looked at me as though she wanted to say something she couldn't. The email contained only 3 words. Keep everything, seriously. No signature, no explanation, nothing else. I read it 5 times, then 10. Each time it became more unsettling. Not because of what it said, because of what it implied. People do not send messages like that unless they know something. And people inside HR definitely do not send messages like that unless they're afraid. I looked at the clock. 4:31 a.m. For a moment, I considered replying. Instead, I saved the email in 3 different places. Then, I made copies, just in case. The rain had stopped overnight, but the air outside still carried that damp, metallic smell that follows a storm. By the time I arrived at work, the building looked exactly the same as it always had. Glass, steel, corporate confidence. Yet something felt different, like a stage after the audience has left. The scenery remains, but the illusion is gone. The receptionist greeted me with unusual enthusiasm. Too much enthusiasm. People tend to overcompensate when they're nervous. That was becoming a pattern. As I walked toward my office, conversations seemed to pause a fraction of a second too long. A manager I barely knew suddenly became fascinated by his phone. 2 employees stopped talking when I rounded a corner. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just enough to notice. And once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. By noon, the company responded to my records request. The package wasn't complete, not even close. But it was enough. Hundreds of pages, emails, internal notes, meeting summaries, approval chains, timestamps, names, lots of names. I spent the afternoon reviewing them, hour after hour, page after page. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly. The office gradually emptied. Sunlight faded from the windows. Still, I kept reading. Most of the material was ordinary, boring even. Corporate language has a remarkable ability to bury meaning beneath layers of harmless-looking words. But patterns eventually emerge, and patterns tell stories. The first inconsistency appeared shortly after 6 o'clock. A document referenced a meeting that supposedly occurred on a Tuesday, except every attendee's calendar showed they had been somewhere else. Not one conflict. All of them. Interesting. I kept reading. A second inconsistency appeared. Then a third. Tiny details. The sort people assume nobody will ever examine closely. The sort details that become very important when someone finally does. My desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across the papers. Beyond that circle, the office had fallen nearly dark. Rows of empty workstations stretched into shadows. The building creaked occasionally as temperatures changed. It felt less like an office and more like an abandoned theater. And somewhere inside the paperwork, the script was beginning to fall apart. Then I found an email, a short one, barely 2 sentences. Ordinary on the surface, except for the attachment reference. The attachment didn't exist, at least not in the records they provided. I searched again. Nothing. Missing. That got my attention. Because people accidentally include documents. They accidentally send documents. They accidentally forget documents. But attachments don't usually vanish from multiple systems. Unless someone makes an effort. The room suddenly felt colder. I checked the sender, then the recipients, then the approval chain. The names repeated. The same small group appeared again and again. HR Legal, Senior Management. A neat little circle, a closed loop. And right in the center of it sat a name I hadn't expected to see. The company's outside property attorney. I stared at the screen. Property attorney. Not employment attorney. Not labor counsel. Property. Real estate. Leases. Buildings. Contracts. The connection made no sense, not yet, but it shouldn't have been there. I leaned back slowly. The city lights glittered beyond the glass. Far below, traffic moved like rivers of red and white sparks. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time, I became certain that whatever was happening extended far beyond an HR investigation. The accusations against me were only the visible part, the surface, the cover page. The real story was hiding somewhere deeper. Somewhere nobody expected me to look. My phone vibrated. A new email. Same sender, same assistant. This time, there was no message. Only a single attachment. No file name. No explanation. Just a blank file icon waiting to be opened. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Because sometimes, you can feel a turning point before it happens. Like the pressure change before a storm. Like hearing distant thunder before seeing lightning. Whatever was inside that file, someone had risked something to send it. And deep down, I knew that once I opened it, there would be no going back. If this moment made you glance twice at a harmless email or wonder what might be hiding behind a polished corporate smile, you're not alone. Some stories begin with an accusation. The interesting ones begin with a question nobody was supposed to ask. The attachment opened without a file name, without a title page, without any indication of where it had come from. Just a spreadsheet. At first glance, it looked painfully ordinary. Rows, columns, reference numbers, dates. Reference. The kind of document most people would close after 5 seconds. I almost did. Then I noticed one detail. The metadata. Whoever had removed the file name hadn't removed the edit history. And edit histories tell stories. Sometimes better stories than the documents themselves. I leaned forward. The office around me had become almost completely dark. Only a handful of lights remained scattered across the floor, glowing like distant campfires in an empty landscape of desks and glass partitions. The spreadsheet had been modified dozens of times. Nothing unusual there. But the names attached to those modifications made my pulse quicken. Several belonged to executives. One belonged to the outside property attorney. And one belonged to a person who officially didn't exist anywhere in the company's organizational chart. No title, no department, no public record, just initials, repeated over and over again, like a ghost moving through the system. I began tracing the entries. The numbers appeared random. Then patterns emerged. Addresses, building codes, lease identifiers, renewal dates, not employment records, not personnel files, real estate records. The realization settled slowly. The spreadsheet had nothing to do with me. Nothing. Which immediately raised a more important question. Why had someone connected to my case risked sending it? A chill moved through me. Not fear, recognition. The sensation that separate puzzle pieces were beginning to align. I opened another tab and compared names. The same circle appeared again. HR Legal, Executives, Property Management. Again and again, different documents, different conversations, same people, same approvals, same signatures. Outside wind rattled against the glass. The sound seemed louder now. The building felt strangely hollow, as though most of its confidence existed only during business hours. After dark, it became what it really was, a collection of rooms filled with secrets. My screen glowed against the darkness. Hours passed. The spreadsheet led to emails. The emails led to contract references. The contracts led to archived approvals. Each document answered one question and created two more. And then I found something that stopped me completely. A lease amendment. 3 pages, signed months earlier. The signature block contained a date. The approval chain contained another. Neither matched. At first I assumed it was clerical error. Then I checked supporting records. The discrepancy remained. I checked again. Still there. One date suggested the agreement had been approved before certain financial reviews occurred. The other suggested the reviews happened first. Both versions couldn't be true. Someone was wrong, or someone was lying. The distinction mattered. A lot. Because large companies build defenses around documentation. Documentation is their armor, their shield, their proof. If the paperwork becomes unreliable, the entire structure begins to wobble. And once structures start wobbling, people get nervous. Very nervous. My phone vibrated suddenly. I nearly dropped it. The screen showed an unknown number. No voicemail, no text, just a missed call. I frowned. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Same number. I answered. Silence. No breathing, no background noise. Nothing. Then, the line disconnected. I stared at the screen. The office felt colder than before. A minute later, an email arrived. Not from the assistant, not from HR, no sender name, just an anonymous address. The message contained one sentence. You're looking in the wrong place. I read it twice, then smiled despite myself. Because anonymous warnings often reveal more than intended. If someone wanted me looking elsewhere, then perhaps I was already somewhere important. I saved the email, made copies, added notes. The routine was becoming familiar. By midnight, the city outside resembled a sea of scattered lights. Most floors in neighboring buildings had gone dark. Only a few windows remained illuminated. Insomniacs, security staff, people carrying burdens home couldn't solve. I gathered the documents into organized folders, dates, names, approvals, contradictions. A picture was forming, incomplete, fragmented, but real. And right in the center sat a question nobody had answered. Why was HR so invested in a matter involving lease records? Nothing about that connection made sense. Not yet. Yet every trail kept leading back to it. I shut down my computer and stood. The office groaned softly around me. Air systems cycling. Elevators moving somewhere in the distance. The sounds felt strangely alive. As I headed toward the parking garage, I noticed movement through the glass wall overlooking the executive floor. One office was still occupied. A single light burned behind partially closed blinds. Someone was inside. At this hour, I couldn't see a face, only a silhouette, standing motionless, watching the floor below, watching my floor. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the blinds closed completely, and the light went out. The parking garage smelled of concrete, engine oil, and rain-soaked asphalt. The scent hung in the cold air as I stepped out of the elevator. Most of the garage was empty. Only a handful of vehicles remained scattered across the levels, isolated beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed softly overhead. The kind of place where every footstep seems louder than it should. Every shadow appears slightly deeper. I glanced back toward the elevator doors. Nobody. Still, the image of that silhouette lingered in my mind. The motionless figure behind the executive office blinds, watching, waiting, or maybe simply making sure I knew I had been seen. The distinction mattered. I wasn't yet sure which possibility was worse. My car sat near the far end of the level. As I approached, my phone vibrated again. Another anonymous email. No subject, no signature. Just 6 words. Some records were never requested. I stopped walking. The garage suddenly felt very quiet. Not empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet that makes small sounds stand out. A distant door closing. A ventilation fan turning somewhere above. The faint ticking of a cooling engine. I reread the message. Some records were never requested. Not missing records. Not destroyed records. Records I hadn't asked for. That was different. Very different. Because whoever sent it wasn't warning me away. They were pointing me somewhere. The question was why. I opened my original request. Pages of carefully listed categories appeared on the screen. Emails, internal communications, meeting notes, reports, approvals, personnel records connected to the allegations. Everything seemed comprehensive. Until I noticed something. One category was absent. Deliberately absent because I had never imagined it would matter. External communications. I stared at the words. A small realization unfolded inside my mind. Slowly. Like a lock turning. If internal documents were showing connections between HR, legal, executives, and property counsel, then conversations with outside parties might reveal something the internal records concealed. The possibility sat there quietly, dangerously, waiting. I slipped into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, I reviewed names, again. The property attorney, executives, HR leadership, the mysterious initials, patterns, connections. Then something surfaced from memory, a detail so small I had nearly discarded it. During the meeting, when I requested documents, the legal representative had answered carefully. Too carefully. He hadn't discussed evidence. He hadn't discussed facts. He had discussed what could be disclosed. At the time, it seemed procedural. Now it felt strategic, as though the greatest concern wasn't what existed. It was what might become visible. The realization followed me home. Long after midnight, long after the city streets emptied, I sat at my dining table surrounded by printouts. Stacks of paper reflected the warm glow of a single lamp. Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, periodically darkening the room. The apartment felt suspended between night and morning, between certainty and doubt. I opened every document again, not reading for content this time, reading for omissions, absences, gaps, the spaces between facts. Sometimes what isn't present tells the story, and there were plenty of absences. References to attachments that weren't included, meetings without agendas, approval chains ending abruptly, replies without original messages, fragments. Enough fragments to suggest an entire hidden conversation, not enough to reconstruct it. Yet, hours passed. At some point, I noticed birds beginning to sing outside. The first hints of dawn. A pale blue light crept across the window glass. And then my phone rang. Not an unknown number, a company number. I answered immediately. Silence greeted me again. Silence. For 3 long seconds. Then a voice spoke. Quiet. Almost whispering. Check the building acquisition files. Before I could respond, the line disconnected. I stared at the screen. No name, no extension, nothing. Just a completed call. The phrase echoed through my thoughts. Building acquisition files. Not lease files. Acquisition files. A completely different category. A completely different scale. and one that had never appeared in any document connected to the allegations against me, at least not directly. I stood and walked to the window. Morning light spread slowly across the city. Roofs emerged from darkness. Traffic began to return. People prepared for ordinary days. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Because for weeks, I had believed the question was why the company wanted to prove my guilt. Now, another possibility was taking shape, a more unsettling one. Maybe proving my guilt had never been the objective. Maybe I had simply become useful, a distraction, a convenient focal point, something large enough to attract attention, while something much larger remained unnoticed. I looked back at the mountain of documents covering the table. For the first time, they no longer resembled evidence. They resembled breadcrumbs, a trail, and someone, possibly more than one person, seemed determined to make sure I followed it. Morning arrived wrapped in silver clouds. The city below looked freshly washed, sunlight breaking through gaps in the overcast sky and spilling across rooftops like liquid gold. Commuters filled sidewalks. Trains rattled in the distance. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. Everything appeared normal, which was remarkable, because by then, normality felt like the least trustworthy thing in the world. I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The lobby was nearly empty. The security guard nodded as I entered, then hesitated. Just slightly. A tiny pause. The kind that had become impossible for me to ignore. He looked as though he wanted to say something. Instead, he simply wished me a good morning. The elevator carried me upward. Floor numbers glowed one by one. Each ding sounded strangely loud. When the doors opened, the office floor greeted me with silence. No conversations, no ringing phones, no footsteps. Only the low hum of ventilation systems moving air through the building. I headed directly to the records archive, a department most employees never visited, a forgotten corner of the company. Rows of cabinets, storage shelves, old files, dust, history. The archive manager wasn't there yet, which gave me exactly what I needed. Time. I sat at a terminal and searched acquisition records. Dozens appeared, then hundreds. Properties purchased over the years, office buildings, warehouses, land agreements, corporate expansions, nothing unusual. Until one address appeared. I recognized it immediately. Not because I had ever visited it, because I had seen it before. Buried inside the mysterious spreadsheet. I opened the acquisition file. The purchase had been expensive, very expensive. Pages of approvals followed. Financial reviews, legal assessments, board authorizations. Everything seemed complete, professional, routine. Then I reached a section labeled Supplemental Approvals, and suddenly the names returned. The same names, again, executives, legal, the property attorney, the mysterious initials. My pulse accelerated. I opened another file. Same pattern, another, same pattern, a fourth, again. The circle kept appearing, over and over, like fingerprints left across multiple crime scenes. Except these weren't crimes, at least not officially, not yet. I printed documents, highlighted dates, built timelines, compared signatures. By late morning, my desk looked like an investigation room from an old detective film. Paper everywhere. Lines of connection forming in my notebook. Questions multiplying. And then I found it. The discrepancy. The one thing nobody had expected someone outside their circle to notice. A property valuation report. Simple. Boring. Forgettable. Except the valuation cited a lease agreement. The lease agreement cited an amendment. The amendment referenced approval documentation. And the approval documentation contained a date that did not exist. Not an incorrect date. A non-existent one. A meeting supposedly occurred on a day the board had never convened. I checked calendars, minutes, attendance records. Nothing. The meeting was fiction. Yet its approval had unlocked millions of dollars worth of transactions. For several seconds, I simply stared. The office noise slowly returned around me as employees arrived. Conversations, phones, laughter, life. Meanwhile, my world had narrowed to a single page. One impossible date, one impossible approval, one impossible explanation. A shadow fell across my desk. I looked up. The assistant from HR stood there. The same assistant. She appeared exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Tension written across her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she carefully placed a sealed envelope on my desk. No greeting, no explanation, no witnesses nearby, just the envelope. Her voice was barely audible. "You didn't get this from me." Then she walked away. Not quickly, not dramatically, just gone, disappearing into the flow of employees crossing the floor. I stared after her, then looked down. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside was a single key card. No label, no markings, just a key card and a handwritten note. 5 words. Basement archive, tonight, alone. The handwriting wasn't hers. I was certain of that. A chill moved through me. Not because I was afraid, because everything suddenly connected. The anonymous emails, the missing documents, the warnings, the ghost initials, the silent phone calls. Someone inside the company wasn't trying to stop me. Someone was guiding me, carefully, deliberately, towards something hidden, something buried deep enough that ordinary records requests would never reach it. Outside my office window, clouds drifted across the afternoon sun. The light dimmed, brightened, dimmed again, and for the first time since the meeting, I stopped thinking about the accusations against me, because they no longer mattered. Whatever waited in that basement archive was the real story. And somewhere in the building, people still believed I hadn't figured that out.